hair-thin streak of red liquid dripped down the side of the barrel. A fly landed on it almost immediately, and that's when investigators knew it was blood. Were they about to finally discover the evidence they needed to prove John Robinson was not just a con man, but an actual serial killer living among them? Yes, they were. We begin our story in March of the year 2000. A new century and a new millennium were beginning, and the big Y2K scare, to everyone's relief, was totally overblown. But up in Monroe, Michigan, about 40 miles south of Detroit, a woman named Carolyn Trouten was dealing with her own very personal fears. She worried about the well-being of her 27-year-old daughter, Suzette. Suzette had been working as a nurse, providing end-of-life care for the terminally ill. And not only did this work barely pay enough for Suzette to get ahead financially, but it was taking a toll on her mind and body, aging her beyond her years. So when a wealthy, middle-aged businessman in Kansas, a man she'd met online, offered her the opportunity of a lifetime traveling the world with him while helping care for his elderly father, she jumped at it. It was a job that paid nearly 3 times what she had been making. Some of her friends were concerned that this opportunity sounded too good to be true. But how could Suzette pass this opportunity up? So the man, who called himself JR, flew Suzette out to Kansas to meet him and see for herself that he was the real deal. When she arrived, he picked her up from the airport in a chauffeured limousine, put her up at an extended stay hotel, showed her around town, and she returned home to Michigan feeling assured that JR was legitimate, and so was this job offering. Then, after a few weeks in Kansas, her communication with friends and family back home suddenly became strange. Her emails didn't sound like her. It sounded like someone else was writing them. And Suzette kept misspelling the name of one of her dogs, which she would never do. Carolyn, her mother, also received a letter in the mail, which on surface also appeared to be from her daughter. But it was typewritten, and written in a style, again, that just didn't feel like Suzette. Carolyn and the rest of Suzette's family had begun to feel like something was radically wrong. So they phoned the police down in Kansas. And as it turned out, this wasn't the first time they were hearing about this man, John Robinson. Police knew the name John Robinson very well. In 1985, 15 years earlier, a young mother named Lisa Stacy had disappeared along with her 4-month-old daughter after connecting with John Robinson through an outreach program for vulnerable young mothers. No trace of Lisa and her baby was ever found. Fast forward 15 years when they get this call from a worried Carolyn about her daughter Suzette, who had run off with John Robinson. Lieutenant Mintier and Sergeant Ingram felt that Suzette Trouten was no run-of-the-mill missing persons case and wasted no time beginning their investigation. Maybe this was the spark they needed to finally crack down on Robinson. Suzette's family had told the police in Kansas how Suzette wouldn't go anywhere without her Pekingese pups, Harry and Pika, so the investigation started there. Detectives began calling local animal shelters and kennels around town, and soon they hit pay dirt. 2 well-cared-for Pekingese dogs, without tags or collars, had been found wandering behind a trailer home in Olathe and were quickly adopted out to separate homes. The detectives went to one of these homes where the dog was adopted, and once inside, they called out, "Harry, Pika." Maybe these were Suzette's dogs, and if they were, it would confirm everyone's fears that Suzette was really in trouble. The little dog came running with its tail wagging. That's so sad. Not only had these dogs been separated from their owner, but they too had been separated from each other. At this point, the detectives called Carolyn Trouten back to share the news, and that's when Carolyn realized her daughter, Suzette, was probably dead. If Lisa Stacy went missing with this guy 15 years earlier and has never been seen again, where did that leave her daughter? When John Robinson was confronted with this while police were listening in, he claimed that Suzette wasn't actually with him anymore. He claims she had decided not to take the job and instead had met some other man named Jim Turner and left to travel the world with him. But that's not like Susie, Carolyn told him. She always calls. She wouldn't do this. Carolyn told him she was getting nervous because his story wasn't making sense and she was thinking of going to the police. "Why?" he asked in a mousy high pitch. He tried to talk her down from it. "I wouldn't get nervous, hun," he said, sounding rather nervous himself. "She's a big girl." Carolyn paused. That verbiage that John Robinson had just used on the phone was very similar to language that was used in one of those emails supposedly written by Suzette to her mother. "Don't worry about me," the email had ended. "I'm a big girl, bigger than I should be." She was sick. If Robinson was impersonating her daughter in the letters to her loved ones, he took it upon himself to comment on her weight. What a total dirtbag. The Secret Service independently had already been investigating him and an accomplice for forging signatures on government checks. Robinson would finally be sent to prison for an extended period of time for this, not for the girl's disappearance. Authorities executed search warrants on his multiple properties, and they converged on his old farm in Lacine, where after searching the property for several fruitless hours, detectives were close to giving up when something interesting caught their eye. Were they about to finally discover the evidence they needed to prove John Robinson was not just a con man, but an actual serial killer living among them? Yes, they were. It was a pair of yellow 85-gallon steel drums tucked away behind an old trailer. Investigators were struggling to move these heavy barrels when one of them tipped over. A hair-thin streak of red liquid dripped down the side of the barrel. A fly landed on it almost immediately, and that's when investigators knew it was blood. So they pried open the barrel and were instantly knocked back by a pungent stench they knew all too well. Looking down into the barrel, they observed a bloated, decomposing body curled up in a pool of waxy liquid. And in the second barrel were the badly decomposed remains of a second woman. Authorities descended on Robinson's storage unit, the one rented under the name Beverly J. Bonner. Inside, they discovered 3 more barrels. These wrapped tightly in clear plastic and tape, with kitty litter spread around them to absorb the odor. When investigators worked the barrels open, they found 3 more decomposed bodies inside. John Robinson was so much worse than they imagined. The medical examiner determined that all 5 victims had died from blunt force trauma, probably inflicted by a hammer or something similar. Initially, Robinson remained unaware of these discoveries. He believed he was in custody only for the sexual battery and theft charges. In fact, he said to the detectives, "You guys are making a big deal out of this." But when they began asking him about Suzette Trouten, Robinson had nothing to say. And when they asked him about Paula Godfrey, Catherine Clampett, and Lisa Stacy and her infant daughter Tiffany, Robinson asked to speak to his attorney. After more than 2 years of delays, the Kansas trial began in October 2002. Robinson's wife and children were among those sitting in the gallery. During the trial, the jury had shown a photo of John Robinson in January 1985, smiling with his brother Don and family with the newly stolen Tiffany Stacy sitting on John's lap, having been freshly delivered to his brother and sister-in-law. The prosecutors drilled down into Robinson's double life and how on the morning of Suzette Trouten's death, Robinson called his wife Nancy immediately after killing Suzette and was home by mid-afternoon to cook dinner. Prosecutor Paul Morrison would later describe Robinson as an 8 to 5 serial killer. After the jury deliberated, Robinson was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to death. John Robinson is still alive and currently sits on death row at the El Dorado Correctional Facility in Kansas.